Well, I'm happy to be here, and I always think every time I get to a place to speak that I just have to stop. I'm a little amazed that I'm there. It wasn't long ago that I was a farmer in central New York and thought that that's what I'd be all my life. It was 1958 that I felt like I had 1 year of college education back in 1942 at Cornell University, and in 1959 I went back there as a part-time sophomore. Well, some people go through school in 4 years, and more power to them. I graduated in 1964 after 22 years, and a little picture came out in the weekly paper, says Evans graduates after 22 years. You know, cheers. Uh, I'm rather slow to learn, but I find myself now as pastor of a Baptist church in Camden, New Jersey. I'm rather slow to learn, but I find myself now as pastor of a Baptist church in Camden, New Jersey, and I've just finished my second year at Eastern Baptist Theological Seminary up here on City Line. In fact, I just got back from a 3-week tour to the Holy Lands with the seminary, and maybe if somebody will ask me a question about something that happened there, I'll tell you after the, what do they call it, a speech or a lecture. Well, I've had a lot of introductions through the years in different places, but I think the one I liked the best was down at Ithaca, where somebody knew me, and they introduced me as a professional character. And I've been called this in many other things because I've been a practitioner of the ancient and honorable art of dowsing, or locating underground water with a forked stick. Now, people have laughed and people have been angry, but I've had a lot of fun. Now, I said it was ancient, and we don't know how ancient it is, except that they have found rock paintings in the Sahara Desert showing a man holding a forked stick in the traditional upright position. I have references that I'll read to you later from the Bible. They're kind of hidden in some of the King James language and a few other things. Homer and Virgil, you look through literature with an open eye and an open mind, you'll find that the ancients knew about dowsing. Yet the first reference that we have in modern literature was from 1556 in Germany. A monk wrote a book about dowsing, and they used forked sticks of different kinds to find metals and minerals. No reference at all to finding water. Then they took it to England in the early 1600s. The Queen imported some German coal miners. They took the stick with them and began to use it for water there in England. And from there we get the terms water divining, water witching, and water dowsing. Now, I like this Old English word dowsing, which D-O-W-S-I-N-G, which theoretically means to dip, although they don't really know what it means. But I've had trouble with these names, and I'm rather touchy about it. I don't like water divining because, well, frankly, as a minister, I've seen a lot of people that were far from divine who could douse. And I can't get a broomstick off the ground, so I'm sticking with dowsing. Now, when I began to write, I had some magazine articles published, and somebody said, "Norm, what's this I read about your dozing?" I said, "No, that's the wrong expression. I used to do a lot of that in church, and then I started preaching, and I had to give it up." Other people do now. They sleep more during my sermons than they do during my dowsing lectures. And then when I left, I had the executive secretary of the New York State Baptist Association write a little article about me, and I'd been a layman all these many years. He called me a douser. And I saw him later, and I said, "Of all people, you ought to know that, well, Baptists have more need of water than anybody, and we go much farther than just plain dowsing." We're organized, as everybody else is organized today. I'm a member of the American Society of Dowsers, and if you'd like to have some information, they have a quarterly digest, which is full of a lot of good information. I don't have the one that had my picture in it. That was the last one. But the membership is $5 a year, and I think I'm all out of blanks. But if you are interested, let me know, and I'll take your names and addresses and see that you get the literature. There's other information sheets that come along, too. This is the American group that can help you with questions and learning and so forth. British Society of Dowsers has been going for 35, 36 years. There's my membership pin. Oh, by the way, I just got back. I was in Damascus, and the minister doesn't dare wear ties like this very often, but I saw this Damascus brocade. I had to get that. So I just look for opportunities to wear it. I haven't dared in the pulpit yet. But when I went back to Cornell, I found that I was older than a lot of professors and able to get away with a few things that I hadn't been able to do as a freshman. And some of them thought that dowsing should have been educated out of me at that time, but it wasn't. And so I used to play with the professors on quite a few occasions, and especially if one got a little stuffy, I'd get him into a conversation, away we'd go. The traditional grip for a dowser is with the palms up, the thumbs out, and the stick held in an upright position. This one's pretty dry. Some people say it has to be willow or peach or apple, and frankly, anything works. I had one man, I was sitting across from him, and every time I crossed it, the stick broke. After I'd been across 8 times with the wooden rod, somebody handed me a clothes hanger. So consequently, this is really for demonstration. Well, as I said, they used whalebone because I got to breaking up too many bushes, but we also used nylon. And now, nylon is very good, it never breaks. Now, you don't use 2 when you're doing anything but showing off. Nylon won't break. And by the way, when you get through, you're welcome to try everything, and I hope you'll ask lots of questions. About a month ago, the paper showed an Amishman over in Pennsylvania using a pair of pliers. They were flying out of his hand. Watch out. I don't like it, but I don't mind it. There was a man back in New York State who was a dairy farmer, had one hand and a hook on the other. The tractor got stuck when the neighbors were in helping them to cut the corn. So he held a pair of pliers in one hand and just steadied it with his hook on the other and went out. They got a shovel, dug down, found the break in the tile line, and 2 days later they finished cutting that piece of corn. I would guess that 15 to 20% of the people who try it can use a fork stick. My brother wishes he could, but he can't. But one day he was in his shop on Long Island, and he picked up a piece of throttle cable and a choke cable, wrapped them together with a piece of tape. Now, the advantage of this is that, well, if it doesn't work fast enough, you can just give it a little more gas and go to work. But anything works. Here's a pair of fly swatters. If you like to dig, you don't need these, but most people hesitate to just dig when they want a pipe without knowing where they are. And this is nothing more than a piece of welding rod and a copper bushing. You find many plumbers using them. I've talked with people from gas and electric companies, city water works, many places, and they'll use them. You hold them like a pair of pistols. I suggest that if you make a pair, that you start where there is a pipe and trace it out. I've always given this advice. I haven't always taken it. I had a man come to me and say they wanted to locate a pipe because we're going to dig through. It was a spring. I'd known there was a spring there. So I went ahead with the rods, and I said, it's right here, marked it. He said, is it anything out in the garden? I said, I have it. It's right here. So he got a shovel and dug down and found a lead pipe going through about 3 feet down, right smack under the stake that I put in. But I was so thrown by my own certainty that I had the pipe that I got nothing when I walked out in the garden. And what I didn't know, and he didn't know, was that 30 years before they had put in a new copper pipe and bypassed the lead one. and I had the wrong part. I mean, this thing will do this. So start from where you know it is. This is the same thing that I could put into my briefcase. My brother was quite inventive, and well, they used to laugh at all these rods sticking out of my briefcase. Oh, yeah. I think it's right along there, but I haven't checked anywhere else. I'm going to let you folks do that afterward. And I'll tell you about this spot later. Now, here's a radio aerial. I got it from a junkyard. Don't get any wrong ideas. And some people will use one long straight stick of wood, of maple. But here again, this fits in my briefcase better. And whatever is here could be about 16 to 18 feet down. Now, I use other methods of determining depth, but some people find this is the best tool for them. You can hold it one hand, two hands, tight or loose, any way you wish. No, I haven't. I hope I don't. It's a lot of fun. Well, I had two friends who came to me, and well, I was traveling with them into Pennsylvania from New York. And they both were going to drill wells, and one didn't believe in it, and the other one did. Made a beautiful setup for an argument. And I was in between them in the car, and they said, well, where are you? You know, they each wanted me on their side. I said, I don't know. I never tried it. But for 200 miles, I kept that argument going. And then when I got to my motel, I went out and broke a stick. It was called the Willows, and I broke a branch, and they told me how to hold it, and I traced the water pipe right into the motel. And thereon, well, I didn't know what was there for a long time until I found a dug well with water 5 feet from the surface. It was completely covered over with junk. Then I decided to make it work. Now, I have a friend who thought that radio aerial was a little bit hard to handle. So he took about the same length of piano wire and hitched up a little nail. You can't hold this thing still. But we've had a lot of fun with this. Some of you folks may be able to see it. I can't, but I can measure a person's aura with this. You've got the electrical field around the person's body, and especially at the eyes, it'll throw away all the way across the room. Now, in Europe, most of the dowsers will use a pendulum. And you find a lot of dowsers using a pendulum along with the rods. This is a plumb bob. I have a piece of ivory here that whale ivory came from England. And about 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, a man on the Art Linkletter show took a gold box and walked across the station. And then it was very well directly controlled by actually that was the maestro Joe that was an indication of down at Cornell. I found an electrical engineer who this electrical engineer was a little timid till he found an older fellow like me to encourage him. He found just at one vacation that a forked stick would work. And he was with me, I think, the night that I was dowsing blindfolded over the steam pipe. So the next day, he went to his electrical engineering lab with a forked stick. This was a new building. He walked in and started tracing out the water pipes here in the lab, and the instructor finally gave up. He said, you fellows get to work. You come on out in the hall. I want to see a little more. So this instructor, with his white smock and his clipboard and everything, looking very official, was walking down the hall beside Dick. They were going down through, and they came to a right angle down here in the hall, and they ran into the dean of the College of Electrical Engineering with a group of prospective freshmen showing them their new ultramodern laboratory. There was stunned silence, and then both sides went on as if they'd never seen each other. So But Dick found out that he was a pretty good man with a pendulum. And he would take an object with to use his pair of pliers and lengthening the string on a pendulum over the object until it went into gyration. He could come into a room and they had the object covered up in a rug, and he would spot it. The fraternity boys were putting a whole bunch of objects under the rug, buckling it up, camouflaging it every way they could, and for 2 or 3 nights he never had a miss. So I thought I'd try it. And to make it real scientific, I had one of my professors up in the geology department take some ore samples, and he lined them up, 3 samples underneath paper towels and 3 matching samples out on the desk. And then I tried to match them. My score was 100%, but it was all wrong, so I'll stick with my with his rod. Yeah. No, this one is built for that. This is hollow. Now, when I was green, I don't know if I had this one, but for the most part, I find that if I concentrate on what I want, I can bypass this. Although an Italian dowser told me a while ago that this takes care of the fatigue of the mind if you've got your sample in there. The ores were quite mixed, and it wasn't too scientific when we got all done. But we had a good laugh, and ready to try again, and nobody was unconvinced either. The old method of looking for water was to take your rod and walk back and forth until finally you came upon the water. But I find that this takes time, and being naturally lazy, I can concentrate on what I want. When I go to a place to look, I step out. I usually will determine where drain fields are and so forth. I concentrate on what direction is the nearest point of the nearest drain of flowing water. Step 30 feet to the other side and try again. Now, as I mentioned, I was in the Holy Land, and everybody was having a lot of good-natured fun with me. I kept my rod stuck inside my shirt, and a tape recorder on one side, and a camera around my neck, and a pack on my back. I needed a couple more hands. Well, we got to the dead city of Petra, down below the Dead Sea. One of the most fantastic places I've ever been. We were climbing a mountain to reach a temple that was cut in the rocks, and the guide turned to me like this, and he said, "Where is the nearest spring?" Well, the group, they've got him now. Here is rocks and desert and gravel, nothing but desert. And this guide had claimed to be the only tourist guide who knew all of the 23 hidden water sources of the Nabateans. He'd been tourist police there for 4 years, worked with all the archaeological groups. I pulled out the rod, and I said, "It's in that direction." And his eyes got as big as saucers. He said, "You're right, come on." And we went up and cut back off the trail and up into a canyon right to where I'd pointed. And here was a cave as long as this room, but a shelf cave. And in the upper end, where I'd been pointing, was a trickle of water out from under the mountain. There was ferns and moss growing in there where everything else was desert. A basin carved out of the rock that must have been at least 2,000 years old, full of cool, cold, clear water, with duckweed growing on top. Beautiful. But the thing that astonished me was that carved on the rock wall behind this pool was the Greek cross with the 2 bars. And the Byzantine church had left there about the year 600, and it was carved there before then. But the overflow from the spring went about 6 feet, and there was a big baptismal pool carved down in the rock. And like we Baptists, the Greek church then baptized by immersion. And this is half full of water. And I was dumbfounded. He called it Little Paradise. Turned out he'd camped there about 45 days one time. While I'm right there, I did the same thing further up, and he pointed out over a cliff, and he said, "Yes, it's underneath this cliff." The next morning, I stood in front of the temple at the very end of this narrow gorge that you ride through. It's only about 12 feet wide at the end, and the rocks go up for 900 feet. It's a built fortress, most natural place for defense you ever saw. And I stood in front of this temple, and the guide hadn't come yet, and something bothered me, and I took out the rod and walked around, and I called to him, and I said, "Riyadh, would you come here?" He came up, and he said, "What's the matter?" I said, "There used to be a fountain right where I'm standing." He kind of sagged. He said, "You dig down 6 feet, and the water will gush right up out." And it seems that the big flood that killed about 21 Frenchmen last year, as a flash flood went down through this gorge, had covered everything over here. So that's how I find things. Depth, many people will say, if you feel it here, and you walk, say, 40 feet to the spot where it goes down, that it's 40 feet underneath, barring clay. And this works fine on shallow water. There's lots of other methods. I always find some new ones. I don't use it, although it does work pretty well on shallow. People will tell you once in a while, if they're anti-dowsers, well, there's water everywhere. You just go deep enough and you find it. Well, there is a water table in some places. In South Jersey, you don't need a dowser very bad. There you go down 130 feet, you'll hit the Raritan sands. But there are many places where you can get it much, much shallower, where it's coming up to a loose part of the sands. Long Island is one great aquifer. It's the terminal moraine of the great glaciers. And here I get practically nothing, but you go down 60 feet, you get all the water you want. There are some places where I get water at great depth, and I've checked some flows between the bay and the sound in a couple of places. But for instance, here in Pennsylvania, there's lots of dry wells. In my country, in New York, I was called in once very frantically to please come. I got there after dark in a pouring rain. They had 3 holes, 300 to 400 feet deep. It was on top of a hill overlooking Seneca Lake. They wanted to develop this 15-acre chunk. I walked out there, stumbling around in the dark, and I made 3 sites, but I told them this was the best. I said 2 places came together, giving you 40 gallons a minute, at just under 200 feet, which was half the depth of the 3 holes right around it. It was between the holes. And it came in at 200 feet, and that was all I needed to develop it. Another time, a man had a driller in the day before, and he'd gone down about 95 feet near Atisco Lake. And he was in quicksand all the way, and he called me, and I hesitated. I was the most nervous about that site that I've ever been, because I sited a new well 10 feet away from where it was straight quicksand. And I felt like saying, here it is, and running home. And I didn't stay around too long. The driller was extremely disgusted, but he had to move because as he pumped out the quicksand, the ground was caving in, and it was within that far of the foundation of the house. He didn't dare go any deeper. 10 feet away, he hit water at 30 feet that came within 8 feet of the surface, and it's been fine ever since. And I lots of cases like this that I can't go into now. But where some people will say, too, that water is not in veins, it is, and now that NASA has mapped most of the Earth in infrared photographs, a lot of these have shown up very clearly. And they know a lot about water sources today that they didn't a few years ago. Henry Gross spoke about a river under the Sahara. This has been hit. A year ago, they hit it. The French were drilling, and down at 1,300 feet or something, they were drilling for oil. They hit a gusher of water that they couldn't cap, they couldn't stop. It's creating its own river, and there are several villages springing up. The dirt is good enough, so they're irrigating and using it as it flows. Another one's just come in Syria. And in Samaria, I dowsed at Jacob's well. And I will get into this later. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were pretty good dowsers in their own right. And Jacob cut through solid rock 140 feet straight down to hit a stream that was flowing and never came up in the well. They hit the stream, and that was it. You can look down and see the water flowing right through. And it's only 6 feet wide, pretty near 300 gallons a minute that's flowing there. Now, if you're going to cut through rock by hand 140 feet, you've got to be pretty sure what you're doing. At least I would. Now, this is a sympathetic group. I don't have to get ready to run, but when I read Henry Gross and his dowsing rod, and when Robert spoke of this fellow Gross finding water in Bermuda, dowsing from a map, I was pretty disgusted. I had trouble enough just getting people to believe me with a forked stick. Now, if I told them I could work off a map, what were they going to think? Besides, my electrical engineering friend and I had everything worked out. We had some theories going that if we could get these proved, we'd get it all accepted. But I got to thinking, now, why should I laugh or ridicule Gross until I'd tried it? It's a good philosophy for some other things in this life. So one day I had a friend draw me a map. He was at Cornell. He was pretty near my age, had been a farmer. And he used to tell me, Norm, I don't believe in that stuff, but if you could find water on my dad's old farm where they had 4 dry holes, well, I might believe it. So he drew me a map, and I think he suspected what I was going to do, but I took it home, and a friend came in the next day. I used to go to school alternate days. I was 60 miles from school. With a dairy farm, I kind of ran some long hours on occasion. But I said, look, would you do something and not talk about it? And so we closed the doors, pulled the shades, and I said, now just push this ruler across this map. He looked at me, and all right. And I took the rod, and I concentrated. I said, no, the water on this land represents for this map. The thing started down. I stopped. He backed up, and it went back up. Well, we went down, and we pushed the ruler the other way. Well, I was a little bit sick to think that it worked. I didn't know what had happened. The next day I went to school, and I said to the man at lunchtime, I said, Doan, what kind of a road ran by that old farm of yours? He said, it's a good road. I said, was it macadam, cement, dirt, what? He said, it was an asphalt road, a good road. I said, was it break up in the spring a little bit north of the buildings on the left-hand side of the road? He said, have you been up there? And I said, no. Why? He said, yes, it does. Every year they have to bring in a load of asphalt and kind of patch it there. Why? Well, you drilled your 4 wells in the wrong places. Of course, you couldn't drill in the middle of the road, but I said that was the closest source of water to the house. He turned white. He drew another map. I hadn't even dared take that one back with me. Yeah, I can't go much beyond there, except that I believe that this is an ESP trigger. Now, I think that someday we're going to get all this ESP figured out in some kind of electrical terms. I don't know whether I'll live to see the day, and I'm not smart enough to do it. I've tried to get them at Cornell to hitch up an electroencephalograph to my brain and time me while I was dowsing. They thought it was a wonderful idea, but nobody wanted to take the responsibility of having that project under their name, so it didn't get done. It has been done in Italy, and they say that a dowser apparently, where I don't know anything about these patterns, but their pattern of brain waves is different from a non-dowser. They can tell a potential one. They seem to be quite variable. Very simple analogy, and maybe it's too simple. I think that we simply tune to what we're looking for. I can't explain it any other way. I think that it's a sense that is atrophied in us because we haven't used it. We have cars and books and newspapers and telephones. Why do we need an ESP method of communication? I've talked with many people from undeveloped countries at Cornell. We have quite a melting pot there, and invariably they tell us about things that are done in communications that we of the West have no understanding. I think that I might say that this sense is something like that piece of pipe. If it's left unused, it rusts up. And if it's used, it flows. And I know that my ability has become much greater, and others too, as they begin to use it. It grows as many other senses that we have. Of course, they tell us that there's no such thing. You all hear that every once in a while. But the Russians, while our United States Air Force says there's no such thing as ESP, The Russians have now located three different wavelengths on which telepathic messages can be transmitted. And they're working, trying to find ways of broadcasting telepathic message to a population. If they do it, our methods of fighting are over. You ask what this is, why some people have it and why some people don't. I think it's like a lot of other things. Paul lists a lot of gifts of the Spirit in 1 Corinthians 12, and goodness knows we don't have all of these gifts. And I don't find this one listed there, but I like to think of it as a gift that I have that I can use for God. The only time I ever made a real practical mistake was when I was working for a rather rich architect who had a dozen dry holes, and I thought, boy, if I find water for him in the right quantity, I've got it made, I can charge anything I want. And there's some other things in here that were not ethical, and since then, no, I'll do it to help. I'll take a fee, what I earn, don't muzzle the ox that treadeth the grain, but that's all. But whether this is a gift or not, I think that any gift that we have, and here I am as a minister, I have hands, and believe me, they're gifts, and our eyes and our tongues. We're created in the image of God, and these things are ours. And I don't think that anybody should take anything that they don't understand, say this is bound to be evil because we don't understand it. Anything we have can be used for evil, but it can be used for good. So I pointed out Isaac before, because Isaac didn't use his gift of water finding for anybody but himself. The only way anybody else got the benefit was when they took it away from him. And he went out and dug another well. After all, it was a little easier for him than it was for the other people. And Isaac, while he was born the son of promise, all he is known for was being the father of Jacob. Abraham was a great man. Isaac didn't amount to much. And so while my hobby is finding water, my vocation is giving the living water. In the late 15th century, the coins of Portugal had the emblem of the Straits of Gibraltar, the Pillars of Hercules, and over it the words Ne plus ultra. There is nothing beyond. And then a fellow named Columbus went out. Of course, he was a little later, I guess, than somebody from a little further north, but that doesn't matter. He went out and he found that there was something beyond. And so they had to change that inscription at the next minting. And it said plus ultra. I could tell you, but I wouldn't guarantee it would be right. I'll always get an answer. Well, I long time ago, while some people will work ahead, and I know you've heard of Jeannie Dixon and so forth, I'm not going to. When people ask me questions, I keep it on a fun basis and keep it in the past. Well, if I knew what was going to happen, there might be some days I wouldn't get out of bed. I'd rather get up and face it anyhow. So that's just for me. I don't work ahead. There's been a few occasions when I've tried it, picking some dates, but I think here again you have this type of thing. May not be anything more than casting lots, and this certainly is scriptural. The Urim and the Thummim back in the temple, evidently something like a pair of cubes that would give them an answer. I don't know. But if you wanted to do it for your own satisfaction and then see whether that was right, all right. But I just don't do it. One thing that I did do, and I kept it very quiet, I didn't want to hurt anybody else's faith or opinions or anything, but while I was traveling in the Holy Lands, there are many traditional sites, and some of them I just couldn't quite take. And I checked some quietly with my rod, and I wasn't going to bother anybody. I have my own ideas about some. Some of them checked out very nicely, and others didn't. But I soon found that if I should say, now this is the site and not this, well, who are you? So, who am I? So, my own satisfaction, I did it, but I don't go much farther than that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was concentrating. Now, there's a problem here. If it came spontaneous, I did this very well. And I also made some very big boners working with a group after I told them that I could do it. If we were experimenting, I did quite good. There was one time at a 4-H camp, uh, I had failed at another meeting, and I thought it was because the $50 had been passed around. So I said, everybody stay back of this line, and I gave a $50 to a boy and told him to go out here on this field and drop it. I started out, and I went up this way. My direction faded. I felt for it, and I went over this way. I said, well, I guess I'm off now. It faded. I turned around and headed back toward where I'd been, and a kid reached down beside me and picked up the $50 as I was going by. I was so concentrated on where he put it, what he did with it, because I didn't want other people confusing me. One kid spoke up and said, you know, Mr. Evans, he ran up there, over there, and back down. He dropped it as he came back. I followed his tracks exactly. I did this another time when I asked a girl to hide a cigarette lighter, the only thing we had, and I said, Caroline, you hide it. I walked over into the bushes and wasn't there. But Caroline screamed, and I'd walked to the very spot where she'd put it, but Dave had come up and thrown it over his shoulder. So they told me that there'd been some cheating. I'd picked the spot. Then they said, try again. But I couldn't release my mind from Caroline as much as I tried. And I went to another spot, which was exactly halfway between where it had been and where it was. Lots of tricks here, and sometimes you've got to get the right phrasing to the question or you're off. I'm afraid my accuracy would leave me because here again, I want to keep my motives right. Uh, it happened once, so I don't think I'll let it happen again. In Petra, I came back down from this mountain. I'd been upset for about a week, pick up bugs pretty easy, and I'd just been up to the top of the mountain at 6,500 feet and was on top of one of these temples when I got dizzy, carrying a pack, and I didn't tell the guide. I told him to go ahead, and I picked my way back kind of careful. So I was alone, and I stopped down in the bottom and went on up to the hotel, and I said, Riyadh, there's a lot of gold in Petra. He said, yes. We've never found the hidden treasure of the Nabateans. I said, if it's found, does the government get it all? He said, yes, every cent of it belongs to the government. I said, all right, then I'll tell you something. I don't want greed or other motives to enter in, but it's in that direction. Without changing his expression, he said, you're right, it's in that cliff you're pointing to, and that was the one I was sleeping in, but I slept in a cave. He said, it's in that cave. I've worked with archaeological expeditions. We know it's in that mountain. We've never been able to find the entrance. He said, I know I'd like to have you come back to Petra. And I would love to work in the plains of Moab. Oh, I'm an old farmer, and I'd love to see water out there. That's rich land. Well, if I think water, that's what I find. That's what I'm doing is just concentrating. I just ask myself the question, is there gold here, and what direction is it? And with oil, with my hand like this, it will go into a palsy shake over water. But with oil, my hand turns like that until I have to release the tension and start over again. But, well, if I decide to look for something, that's what I look for. Now, again, if you want to keep on, perhaps, to use a sample, and some people will use a sample stuck on the end of their rod. But this gets into problems too if you've got to put the sample in something, if it's water or oil or something. Uh, and I found that my concentration works about as good as anything. I had a sister-in-law who told me one time that she'd lost her diamond ring 2 years before. And I said, well, now I've never tried this. And I picked up a soft maple rod that I had with me, and I stood in the middle of the house, and I said, where is Estelle's missing diamond ring? And I got a direction. And my brother came up and looked over my shoulder, and we went through two bare partitions where there was no furniture against the walls, into the third room, and into a drawer in the kitchen. She said, it's not in there. I've cleaned the house a dozen times, and I've cleaned that drawer out. It's not there. And she pulled it out, and lady stuff, thrown in. And Nothing there. So she shut it up and started to walk out of the kitchen, and all of a sudden she stopped and she went back and she pulled the drawer out until it was ready to fall. It was a deep drawer, and here in the back corner was a little box, and there was a diamond ring. It had worn so thin she'd taken it off, forgotten where she'd put it. Now, whether I'm working on the ring or working through her subconscious, I won't say. But bang, I had it in 3 minutes. Some people are specialists, and some people use different equipment, and I'm sure that some people have different types of reactions on these things. We've experimented a lot. Yes, if you get a reaction with a rod, doesn't mean that you're automatically a dowser and ready to go out and go to work, because you have to interpolate. And it's good to work on known wells, work on things, and learn to test your reactions and start out rather lightly, because water's expensive. I just had a man spent $2,100 and he drilled 3 wells up in New York. They're all good, but a lot of money still. Water? Well, I'm working on them. Uh, my wife and I have been able to communicate messages once in a while, rather startlingly. I tried to send back messages on my trip around the world here, and the family was keeping notes, and they never got strict messages, but time and time again they knew exactly when I was thinking of them. And there was one fellow who was sitting in a group in South Jersey, thought he saw me on a night when I knew when they would be together, and that would have been 4 o'clock in the morning Cairo time. He didn't know I was in Cairo. And I'd gotten to bed at 2 o'clock, and I wasn't about to get up at 4 o'clock and start thinking. So I told myself to dream about this thing at 4, and at 6 o'clock I woke up and my mind was a complete blank. As far as I knew, I'd just hit the pillow. But about an hour later, we were down to breakfast in the dingiest dining hall we'd been in. And while I was asleep, he said he sees Norm in a rather dull looking place, and he says, I wonder if we can get anything to eat here. Yeah. Building it on a safe spot as exploitation, right? But well, I had my greatest experience here. Now, again, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and what to us might be desecration, to somebody else might be the precious ointment poured on Jesus' feet. So, in my upbringing, uh, putting millions of dollars worth of jewels and gold and marble and stuff on these sites and covering them over so you can't recognizing them, to me, this is desecration, but I won't knock somebody else because this is what they think is devotion. The site of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was picked by St. Helena, the mother of Constantine, and she thought she found the hill and crosses in a well and so forth, but this is a long time ago. General Gordon in the 1800s found his Golgotha and the Garden Tomb, and for me, who is of one of the simpler faiths, I could worship here, where I had to get out of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and I think it's the right place. And I had a wonderful experience there. But again, I didn't want to hurt anybody else, and most of us that were there felt that this was wonderful. And this had been excavated, this had been buried, and I'm sure that God has a good sense of humor. If we have it and we're created in His image, He has one too. And I think that he's kept some of these things hidden. And this is simple and it's plain. You can go in there and sit and worship, and it's quiet. And I'm sure that I've been in his tomb. In fact, we burst out, and I have it on my recorder. I have a wonderful testimony from a Christian Arab woman given inside the garden tomb, and our group of about 10 or a dozen, sitting and standing inside, sang He Lives. And I'm going to use that tape next Easter time. I had my experience there. If it hadn't been for the garden tomb, my tour of the holy spots in Jerusalem would have left me a little flat. Most of them are 35 feet underground anyhow. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I'm a minister. I go and I pray. And I know that I have seen some amazing results, although I don't know that I'm a healer. I think I've found some others who have it. In one of my speeches, I found a woman over in New Jersey who had been scared to tell people what she felt because she was afraid of being different. And speaking about this in spiritual application, she began to talk to my wife. My wife called me over, and I told this girl what to read and what to do, and I want to get back and see her. I know that she has healing. Again, I don't know. I think we all have the power through faith of being healers, although some have a special gift. So whether they have or not, I know I've been used, and whether it's, I don't think it's been me alone. I've had a lot of people behind me. I know that I do because I'm not so smart, and I'll get an idea, and it seems just there, and after prayer, and suddenly things will come, and I'm writing so fast to get my notes down that I can't hardly keep up. And this I'm very thankful for. Some people do. I don't seem to. I do think I get tired, but as I mentioned earlier here tonight, some of my most fantastic results have been at speeches when I've been exhausted, and I'm pretty tired tonight. But I'm feeling good while I'm going. I've still got a lot of work to do before Sunday morning, and I've got to preach in a neighboring church at 8:30 and my own at 11, and then again tomorrow night. So I'm still behind the time. Hmm. Do you get tired?